I think we can all agree that working in HR should not feel like you're constantly on a scavenger hunt, digging through spreadsheets, chasing down timesheets, balancing between apps that just don't speak to each other. I'm triggered by all of those ideas. It's just simply not the job that we signed up for. It's complete chaos, pandemonium, even. And so I know that Intuit QuickBooks Payroll will help you leave that chaos behind and focus on what matters most, like supporting and growing your business and your team. QuickBooks Payroll brings together payroll, time tracking, HR, and accounting in one powerful connected platform. No duct taping of your systems, no steep learning curves, none of that. Just clarity, confidence, and time back to focus on your people. For example, I think that it's amazing that QuickBooks Payroll integrates with all of your books through integration, AI, and automation. All of those things handle all of the heavy lifting, giving you nearly 4 hours back a week. And I think we've talked about this before, that any time back in your week is time well spent and money well spent on anything, right? We could all use a little bit more time. So leave the HR chaos in the past. Discover how QuickBooks Payroll can help you today. Learn more by going to quickbooks.com/payroll. That's quickbooks.com/payroll. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This is the very first episode of 2026. And Bryan and I, these are our Policy Pulse episodes, as you have hopefully become very acquainted to throughout the last several months in 2025. But by the time this episode comes out, you already know that I will be out on maternity leave. And the good news is that there are so many fresh episodes coming out that you will be able to listen to. And Bryan and I will continue the Policy Pulse segments when I come back. So we will probably have an episode for you in June. And that episode is going to be jam-packed, we hope and assume, with a ton of information related to a lot of what we've talked about through 2025, because there are Supreme Court decisions that we expect to come out, or to have more information on, at least. And we're already talking about blocking out a lot of time to make sure that we give you all the information that you need, because naturally there will be probably a significant impact on all of us in HR, but people in general. So important information to know. So Bryan, thanks for basically going out on maternity leave with me as we pause the Policy Pulse episodes for a few months. But I'm really excited that this is the very first episode of 2026. I think it's really kind of serendipitous in a way, because we launched these segments in the middle of 2025, and we weren't really sure, what they would feel like, what they would look like. And I think, at least based on feedback that I've gotten from listeners, it seems like people are getting a lot of really helpful information, especially those who are in the US or who have US-based employees. And so for this week's episode, especially given that it's the very first of 2026, Happy New Year, by the way, everybody. I think the first story that we should talk about is the one that shocked me the most, because, why save it for the end? There are some people, like my husband and my mom, who eat their favorite food on the plate first. And then there are people like me who save their favorite food for the end. And in this case, while this is not my favorite food, this is a crazy, horrific story. It is kind of one of those things that we just have to talk about first. So I'm taking my husband and my mom's approach here. We're starting with the best part of the meal, which is this wild and crazy story around a Michigan fire chief who ordered bra inspections. And the information here is that a firefighter in Lansing, Michigan, said that her fire chief ordered male supervisors to check every day whether she was wearing a bra. Not because of any real safety rule. The department, of course, has no policy about undergarments, but because the chief decided it was professional, and I used air quotes there for anyone not watching the video. He allegedly used the chain of command to force male officers to inspect her body as part of her daily routine. This is being framed by the city as a uniform or grooming issue, even though it looks and feels like harassment dressed up as policy. I was shocked. Like my jaw actually dropped, if you could believe it, because it feels so not 2025, or dare I say 2026, because it's just so obviously wrong to me. But I will leave my opinions to the side for the moment. Tell me a little bit about why this story is important to talk about, other than some of the obvious pieces of things here.
So here's another way to shock you, Tracy. This is not the first time this has happened. There was a similar case in 24. A couple years before that, another similar issue. Wow. This one's just the most recent. This was a complaint filed right before Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. The issue, the way I see it, is that it's to use your air quotes around professionalism, it's sort of weaponizing that term to keep things white and male, essentially. And the irony about this case is that there is an actual argument to be made for dress code in a firefighting environment. The National Fire Protection Association has actually flagged this case, saying that there are issues with gear provided to women. Female firefighters are often provided male gear that's too loose, too long, too big. It allows smoke in. It's dangerous, essentially. And so unlike a bra, that type of clothing is a critical safety risk for female firefighters. But a bra is not necessarily a safety risk like a helmet or a mask or true well-fitting safety gear when you're fighting fires. In the past, there have been courts that have deferred to employers on grooming and appearance standards, even when they create unequal burdens on women. For example, there have been courts that have said it's okay to require makeup for women and not for men, because society says women wear makeup and men don't. So that is okay, apparently. So even though this made your jaw hit the floor, and even though this is obviously wrong, I'm not convinced, maybe this is the pessimistic view, but I'm not convinced that this is actually something a court will side with the female firefighter on.
Interesting, because it's not so overtly like illegal because of the safety factors.
I mean, putting my hat on as the city's lawyer, as the firefighter's lawyer, I would argue that a bra is part of the well-fitting gear. That it helps constrain your body and keep your body tight while you're fighting a fire, where, loose fitting clothing or loose items or loose anything could potentially rip on something or touch a fire when you're close to it. I think it's a bad argument, but I think it's an argument that will be made. And I think that this is something that we'll probably see more of, because whether it's in a firefighting environment like this, where true safety is an issue, or it's just a workplace environment, I think we're going to see more of these appearance, dress, uniform type standards come into play. I mean, just look at the Secretary of Transportation a couple weeks ago said, stop wearing pajamas on planes, like dress up for air travel. Like these are the types of things that we're going to start seeing.
Yeah. Interesting. A couple thoughts. The first is that I think what feels maybe this is like an quote unquote emotional word, but what feels wrong, there's no logic in terms of that, right? Because this is kind of my opinion or perception of something that I don't necessarily have all the facts on, is that the chief ordered male supervisors to check her. I wonder, and this is obviously a question that maybe would come up in this case, I wonder if there are other women who could have checked. Not to say that makes it any less uncomfortable, But I also think that there's an element there where it's like, you know, I don't know. I even think about like when you go to a doctor's appointment, at least in my experience as a woman, I go into a doctor's office, and if it's a male, if there's a male doctor, then they will have another woman there, whether it's a nurse or some other member of the ancillary staff. And so I think about this in this context, which like maybe there is something there around the wardrobe guidelines from a safety standpoint, which I can understand. But then it's like, okay, well, is it appropriate, to do these checks? Like, are they doing checks for all safety equipment across all genders? Or is it that there was an opportunity for another woman, whether a supervisor or not, to either be there with the male supervisor or to be part of these checks? Like, I feel like there's probably so much more there. And because it does kind of feel like this, the chief, like there, it feels like there's a power dynamic because the chief ordered it. It's not necessarily so black and white in the uniform, potentially in the policies, right? And like it's being framed as a uniform and grooming issue. But this is obviously a plug for like making sure that policies are up to date. And you and I also looked at Michigan's laws, and they do require employers with 5 or more employees, including government employees, to go through anti-harassment training. So it almost feels like it would be so far-fetched for all of these people to be like, yeah, this is normal, if it wasn't normal, but obviously crazier things have happened. So I think all of those questions come up for me. Like, were there other women? Did it have to be this everyday thing? Could they not have just asked her, hey, are you, wearing proper undergarments that keep you safe? Like a well-fitted bra, for example. Like, would that have sufficed? I don't know.
I think those are all great questions, and I think those are questions that will be answered during litigation. I think that there's a lot of good points that you just made, because it's, from what I've read about this case and the whole situation, she was the only female who was subjected to these bra inspections
amongst other females.
Yeah, I don't know if there were other females in the department, in that station house, or whatever. And my understanding is that after she raised this concern and essentially said, there's nothing in the handbook that says, there's nothing in the company policy that says I have to wear a bra, or that if I'm not, you can inspect it. And apparently their policy changed right after that. So you can change the documentation, and employers are within their rights to do that. But it makes it suspect if you're changing it right after someone raises an issue with the lack of clarity weird. in the documentation, in the policy itself.
Yes. And this might be I don't know, what a way to start off 2026, but just to flip the script a little bit, like, one could argue that then men need to wear jock straps, right? Like,
exactly.
So,
yes.
So, wow, I did not, this was not on my bingo card for the first episode. It's like, what did you talk about on the podcast today, Tracy? Oh, yeah. We're talking about bras and jock straps, like, no big deal. But, all jokes aside, one could make that argument, right? That like, okay, if this like concept of compression is important for properly fitting safety equipment, then women have their undergarment and men have their undergarment. And so I don't know, because then it's like, okay, well, are you checking the men for that? Is there an impact there? And I think what's so tough about this is that, to your point, it's a little sus that, as the kids say, that the policy changed right after she raised the concern. I do also wonder, like, how long has she been there? How long have they been doing these checks? Like, is this like a new thing? It's a little strange if it's a new thing. And I do think, I don't know, it kind of brings me back to like those days in school, maybe schools still have this, but with dress code, like girls could not wear spaghetti straps. Your skirt had to be fingertip length or longer. But guys could wear, they call them white tanks now, but they called them wife beaters then, which was a horrible 90s reference, but that's what it was. So like they could have their arms exposed. There was no issue with that. They could wear shorts. They could wear whatever, right? And so it does it does kind of bring me to that gray area where it's like, well, what is the policy for? Is there a level of discomfort if someone is or isn't wearing an undergarment? Is there truly a safety risk? If there is a safety risk, why wouldn't it be in the policy initially? And so obviously, again, a plug for all of us in HR, whether you work for the government or not, having updated policies and making sure that your policies are reflective of what you're actually doing and not just kind of making this grandstand of like what you think needs to be important, because you don't want to contradict yourself with your handbook and your policies, but making sure that they're updated at least once a year minimum is really important. So I don't know, that it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out, but I have a lot of questions for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent issue that you just raised too, because if the city admits that wearing a bra is for the individual firefighter's personal safety and for the safety of every firefighter who's with them, then it would be easy to make the logical next step that the National Fire Protection Association's argument is also valid, that women need to be provided form-fitting, well-fitting fire protective gear, just like men are. Men are measured for their gear like you go to a tailor, and women don't often get that same experience in firehouses. So I think that's an excellent point, because if the city concedes that the bra is for safety, then they have to concede what the National Fire Protection Association is saying as well.
Right. Exactly. The gray area is it's wide. Like there's a lot of gray area, so much gray area that I'm not even, my hands are off screen. And it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, especially since there have been other cases of this. And look, at the end of the day, like, you want to be safe. You want your firefighters to be safe, period. And generally speaking, a lot of these professions, and frankly, a lot of things like even medicine, have not necessarily been designed based on, what a woman experiences or, a woman's body, because historically women were not firefighters. And so it sounds like maybe there's a lot to discuss around this. But very interesting stuff. I say include the jockstrap as well. And then, hey, who's doing those checks, right? It's like, when you flip the script a little, it's like, do you have to do the check, or do you ask? Because at some point there is, in my mind, like an individual ownership over safety. And of course, from like a liability standpoint, the employer, in this case, the city, would have a responsibility to ensuring that everyone is safe, of course. But I also think that this is where, individual responsibility and ensuring that you're wearing your equipment as intended is kind of also mostly your responsibility, even though, of course, if something were, God forbid, to happen, someone could sue the city, and, that's that. Then they could say, oh, well, no one checked my equipment. It goes, it's just, it can go both ways, I suppose.
It definitely can. I think that this is a simple story of male domination and female submission. I think that that's ultimately what it comes down to. I think it's the fact that firefighters tend to be a male dominated profession. There's, locker room talk, like, not that is appropriate. It's not. But that's the type of atmosphere that a lot of firehouses have. And I think this just ultimately comes down to the fact that they just want boys around. And I think it really can be that simple. I don't think any lawyer on either side would necessarily argue that to any to any great depth, but I think it's really that simple. And I think to your point about women in professions generally that you were making a minute ago, I think a lot of that comes back to the founding of this country as it is today. I think a lot of that comes from the Protestant background that so many of the founders have and had, and that has just trickled down throughout the generations. And it's unfortunate, and it needs to change. And I hope that this case moves and makes some positive changes. But this is just one of many examples that happen daily in this country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that I'm even thinking about as a woman myself. Like, I was a catcher in softball my whole, adolescence. Like, from the time I started playing softball until, basically I went off to college. And, those uniforms are not made for women. Not in the slightest. And so it's just, it's obviously a very minuscule example compared to, maybe they're made for women now, but they weren't when I was playing. They didn't even have knee savers. At least my coaches didn't have me using knee savers. Maybe that's why I'm hobbling around half the time until I was like in high school. But, all this to say, I think that time does lend itself to positive change and things like this. I could only imagine that would probably be pretty uncomfortable, like having to do those types of checks, depending on if it's like, oh, show me your bra strap, then it's like, okay, whatever. But like, what did that check look like? I don't know. There are just a lot of questions, but in any case, we should have had a drinking game, like for every time we said bra, take a drink, That's what we should have started this out with. And I'm still pregnant, so take one for me. So that's two drinks per the use of bra. Anyway, our second story discussion for this week is actually that a president can fire National Labor Review board members at will. And this is something that has come up on prior episodes, but last week, so beginning of December, a new ruling came down from the DC Circuit, aligned with other rulings stating that a president can remove NLRB members at any time for any reason. For decades, board members could only be removed for cause, which insulated the agency from political swings. Obviously, we know that the swings have been swinging the last several months. That protection is now gone. The court said that the NLRB has too much executive power, i.e. rulemaking, policymaking through decisions, enforcement, and even independent litigation, to operate outside direct presidential control. Can you break that down for us a little bit and kind of help us to understand what's changing?
Yeah, essentially what they're saying, what the courts have been getting, the point the courts have been making in these rulings the last few months with the NLRB is that it is a department of the executive branch, and it should operate under that umbrella, which means that the president has the authority to terminate and replace members of that board. Essentially, think of it this way. The cabinet positions, the president has the sole authority to remove and replace. And that's what the DC Circuit is basically saying, is that this is the board members on the NLRB are essentially equivalent to another cabinet position that the president can replace at their whim.
Interesting. And they were, just so I'm clear, they were not part of the executive branch before. Or not seen as such.
The agency itself is, but they were seen as an independent agency. So not subject to the changes in political administrations. They were appointed to terms that were intentionally longer than a presidential term. So they would overlap with president.
Right.
Exactly.
More elasticity.
So it didn't. Exactly. And some more, they were slower to make changes. That was the whole idea, was that they were insulated from political swings, so that they would be a little bit more, they'd be a little bit more stable, which is kind of the opposite of what I expect we're going to see now.
Got it. Well, this is a nightmare. This is an absolute nightmare, because now we're all in a sense, everyone is impacted each election cycle, right? Because if they impact labor and employment laws, or have an effect on, it's not necessarily everything, but if they have an effect on employment law and they can be terminated at any time and follow the election cycle, then that fabulous word whiplash that we use so often in our segments will, as you've put it here, accelerate. But that kind of sounds like a nightmare. This is horrible.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I used to tell clients years ago was that HR tends to be not only boring for most people, but it also tends to be predictable. That is no longer the case for either of those, I think. And this is one reason why. I think we're going to see more dramatic swings as new administrations come and go from the White House. These are not going to be gradual shifts. They're going to be rapid policy reversals. We're going to see the agency no longer be independent, and it's going to reshape compliance. It's going to reshape business. It's going to reshape lawsuits, employee lawsuits against their employer under the NLRB. I think some places are going to. I think some places are going to have some trouble adjusting to this new reality.
Yeah. And actually, I should also mention that what I think is horrible about this is not necessarily that the change so much as the impact of the change, because or at least I should say the potential impact, because I just see there's so much that the NLRB can and does influence, and with rapid, ultimately rapid being anything more than what it is today, rapid changes and potential for rapid changes can just make it really hard to execute on the things that impact compliance as an employer, for us in guiding employers. And I think about, I don't know, things as simple as, maybe not as simple as, but I don't know, we were talking about like anti-harassment training. Obviously there's this is a state approach, but when we think about it at the federal level, anything that's like federally governed, I'm trying to, like, I don't know, the FLSA and federal minimum wage. I don't know. I'm thinking about things that could be impacted by labor law changes or impacts to how those labor laws are created or maintained, and all of that it just can make it so much harder to actually lead through that. And so naturally, this need to reinforce consistency and things like that certainly prevails, but that's already important and it's already hard. So I can only imagine for employers who are not necessarily 100% there, that this can be even more difficult. And maybe the other side of the coin is that it's easier for employers to get away with being non-compliant. And maybe this is good for employers. I don't know.
I think in the current administration, yes, this will be better for employers, because this administration is very much in the camp of deregulation, personal responsibility. If you have a problem with your boss, if your boss is sexually harassing you, that's a you problem. You need to dress differently. You need to avoid your boss type of thing, which is, BS. But like, I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see more job hopping. I think we're going to see more disengagement at work. And on the flip side, where employers are, I'll say, doing the right thing and treating their employees with respect and being compliant with state and federal laws, you're going to see more loyalty and more engagement in those organizations. Yeah. Because people want to work somewhere where they feel valued, where they feel cared for, where they feel appreciated, where they're not treated like garbage. And I think that we're going to see some diversion in this area. And then who knows, in 2028, what happens if there's a progressive that gets into the White House? Are we going to see a massive flip? Presidents don't usually give power back once it's given to them. Totally. So are we going to see a someone the opposite of Trump? Are we going to see them come in and say, no, we need to go back to the old ways. The NLRB needs to be independent? Or are they going to be like, well, the last guy did this, so I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to put people on the board that are aligned with me and have more employee-centric views. And we're going to increase regulation, increase NLRB suits against organizations that aren't in compliance. That's to your point. That's part of the stress. Like HR has always been stressful. HR always kind of sits in the middle between employers and employees. Yep. And this is just going to totally expand on that stress, on that difficulty, especially for HR departments of one, where they don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. They don't have anybody to talk through some of this stuff with. Maybe besides the bottom of a wine bottle or something, but like it's going to get worse.
Yeah. It makes me wonder too, like, does this swing the pendulum in favor of the union or outside of favor of the union? Because, I think about like the elasticity that exists today and how the NLRB can, it goes beyond the span of, an election cycle. And they need, the only termination opportunity is for cause today. But now with this, being at will, even though, we understand that even in at will states, you still can terminate with or without cause. Like at will is only so much at will, depending on the, the way the company kind of interacts with that. But I just wonder if then there will actually be more of a push for unionization because those unions on a micro scale have more elasticity and more of an ability to withstand, governmental changes than whatever is happening at the federal level. So, for companies where they have, one person in HR, people might say, oh, nope, let's engage in collective bargaining because we're not getting what we need because this one person in HR can't keep up with all of these, changes that are tied to the whiplash related to, the government. Or is it the opposite? And is it like, well, because we don't have, there isn't consistency at the NLRB at the federal level, unions don't necessarily have a common thread to rely on. Like it's hard to see where this will land for unions too.
I think it could absolutely, to your point, I think it could absolutely spur an increase in union membership. I do think it will be a little bit more nuanced than that. I think realistically, it will probably spur an increase in union membership in blue states. And I think in red states, it will spur more organizing because I anticipate that red states will follow the federal lead and try to stop unionization as best they can. So I think we will see union membership in red states stay where it is or maybe even drop a little bit. But I think we will see organizing, informal and formal organizing, but not quite to the union level. I think we will see that increase because people will see there is safety in numbers. There is power in being together, talking as a group. So I think you'll see that within individual businesses, within individual stores of big chains. I don't think, I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think at least across the board, we're going to see a massive increase in union membership. I think we'll see it in blue states, and I think we'll see more of the informal organization in red states.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess we'll see. It'll be interesting. I was trying to look for a different word since I just said it 7,000 times. It'll be interesting to see what ends up kind of coming from this change because I do think it's pretty impactful. It's probably one of the most impactful changes that we've talked about in these segments. There have been a lot, but this, I mean, that's it. It's pretty profound, I think. We'll see. I guess we'll see. It
is. And I think it's a testament to the impact that it can have on businesses and HR that we have talked about it so much because it's not something you see much in, on the national news at night. You're not seeing discussions about the NLRB. But I think it's important to HR professionals to have a finger on this pulse because it is it is potentially catastrophic to the consistent way of life that HR professionals have had until recently.
Yeah, 1,000%. So as we look ahead to 2026, of course, this being the very first episode of the year, and knowing that we're going to have several months in between this episode and our next, what are some of your thoughts on what's next for HR? Do you have predictions? Do you have, theories around what we can expect, and maybe even what we'll be talking about in that next episode come the early summer, late spring?
Yeah, I live in Vegas, so let's bet, let's gamble a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that there are three things that I am looking at in 2026 that I think will potentially make some additional challenges, but besides everything we've already discussed. And I think that one of those is going to be a push for companies to implement AI. You have leaders saying, how can we implement AI? How can we be more effective? How can we implement AI into our daily processes? How can we potentially eliminate employees by implementing AI? The question HR should be asking in response to that is, should we? Is this something? Is this a process? Is this a task that AI, number one, can do and is competent at? Mm-hmm. And two, what are the ramifications if we do that? Mm-hmm. I think that is something that we're going to see this gap widen because, AI has been a buzzword for a long time, but companies are really being pushed to implement AI to manage efficiencies better. And a lot of times that means getting rid of people. Mm. So HR needs to stay focused on the people decisions, the workforce decisions, and to a point you made earlier about the actual impact of those decisions. Because in my view, HR is the only department in the room looking out for that impact, looking out for the human impact, the workforce impact, looking out for, at least they should be. Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's so fair. It had come up with, actually at work, with some of my members of my team around AI and hiring. And they're, members of my team and some colleagues were like, let's just use AI. Like, let's just do it. Even though, of course, tools all kind of have some automation baked into them at some level. And I was like, whoa, let's pause, because do we really understand what that means? In states like New York, we know that there is a disclosure that has to go into job posts if AI is a part of any decision making. And fun fact, decision making is not necessarily like, yes, I'm going to hire someone, or no, I'm not going to hire them. It is at the very point of looking at a resume and deciding to pass it on to the next round or not. That is considered a hiring decision, at least in New York. And so I was like, yeah, no, we this is not something, you don't just like flip a light switch with AI. That's just not, that's how companies that we've talked about on this podcast before have landed themselves in deep SHIT and hot water. Because if I spell it, does it have to be explicitly marked as an episode? I wonder, like if I spell it out, does it count? Or is it only if I say it? Because then I should have just said it, because it's so much more fun to just say explicit words. Anyway, I wonder if jockstrap is an explicit word. Anyway, I'm digressing here. I want, right? Maybe we'll have to mark this. Yeah, right?
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, maybe it is. Ooh, we have an explicit policy pulse segment here, everybody, just to be safe. But anyway, it's like, I think it's fair to say, like, okay, well, what necessitates AI? And frankly, I think AI can be used in everything. It's about the responsibility behind the use. How are you using it? How is it set up? How are you as a human interacting with the AI? Like in hiring, which comes up a lot, are you actually looking at the resumes that are being rejected? Are you looking at the ones that are being, moved forward? And, I don't know. I look at job posts all the time, whether it's for something like my own role or something else. And 9 times out of 10, companies are not disclosing that they're using AI. And I'm sure 9 times out of 10, they are using AI. And so there is definitely an element to this where it's like, I think there probably just, again, needs to be more regulation around the use of AI, because we know, we've talked about this before, that the regulation, it's like regulating social media. It just will never catch up unless we're like really, really, really clear about how it's used today. And that's something that's just continuously looked at. But I think it's a very, very fair point to, at least for us to walk away with, to understand that there has to be conversation around how we use tools, whether AI or otherwise. And I've said it before on my podcast that I am not I don't believe in the replacement theory approach with AI, that AI replaces people. I think there's a balance that has to be struck.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into my bet number 2. That AI will see more discrimination issues. You covered a lot of it really well there. So I won't beat that to death, but I think even with a pro AI administration that we currently have, an anti-regulation administration who has said they want to block regulation around AI for at least a decade, that still doesn't shield employers from any liability. If the algorithm, if the system that you're using, even if you don't know that you're using it because you're using a software that isn't disclosing, to your point, that it's using AI to screen out candidates for you. If that algorithm screens out anyone who's a member of a protected class, employees, candidates, they can still sue you. And those cases won't disappear just because we have a pro AI administration in the White House.
And they definitely will sue. That's the thing. Like, you can always count on a lawsuit. That is something that, it's like the sky is blue, the grass is green, and people will sue. Like, those are 3 truths in life, other than pay your taxes and everyone dies at some point. Like, not to be morbid, but that is just, the reality of life. Yeah, interesting. So what is your third and final bet then for us here?
The third one is one we touched on earlier too, and that's the blue state, red state divide is going to accelerate. Whether it's privacy laws, reproductive rights, pay transparency, work classification, as we just talked about, AI laws, these have been a conflict between red states and blue states for a while now. I think that's going to continue, and it's going to accelerate. There will be I think we will get to a point where there will be almost no overlap between states, red states and blue states, in their rules, and employees' rights will simply be determined by where they live. Especially multi-state employers, they are going to see much more legal exposure and more pressure, to your point about the stress of HR, to build policies that work across incompatible systems, a task which I think is insurmountable, which could end up resulting in different policies, different handbooks, and crucially, different employee experiences at the same company just because you live in 2 different states. And I think we're going to see more of that divide. We're going to see more of that accelerate in the coming months.
Interesting. Well, I think that puts a lot of pressure on companies to figure out what is their baseline going to be. I think I've mentioned it before that it's like, when in all of the companies that I've worked for, California employees were always present. So it's like, if California was the most litigious or employee friendly on a particular, policy, then everyone followed that. And there are companies who don't prefer to do that, but maybe it behooves them to.
It might, but a word of caution on that, because there are some states like Texas and Florida that are not just creating their own lack of laws. They are actively creating laws that say employers can't provide reproductive benefits. Right. And so then you can't, if you have an employee in Texas, you cannot provide them with the California handbook. We talked about this too. Yeah. I think we did, yeah. But yeah, it's an important distinction. And I think that's where the acceleration and the divide, the chasm, is going to grow. Yeah, well, those are 2 totally extreme. California and Texas are probably the most polar opposite states for employees. So that, oh my God. Yeah, we're going to have a lot to discuss in June. A lot. Well, Bryan, thank you for your bets. Love a Las Vegas-based wager. I don't disagree with any of them. I think that you are totally hitting the nail on the head, and I'm looking forward to when we pick this back up and hopefully help everyone to kind of get an update and a
policy pulse on where everything stands from what we've discussed throughout 2025 and ultimately this episode as the first in 2026. And I'm so glad that we're going to continue these segments because I think they're really helpful for all of us. So thank you. Thank you for being our resident expert on all of these things.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I look forward to a little break, and then I look forward to a lot of discussion on different topics when we come back.
Me too. Well, happy holidays, happy New Year, and see you in a few months. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.